Your first paycheck at the bank clears at 11:40 p.m., which is also roughly when you finish work most nights. You are 22, 6 weeks out of college, and you have already stopped being surprised that the office is fuller at midnight than it was at noon. Somewhere reportedly inside Goldman Sachs's Analyst class, a group of first years once put together an internal presentation reporting they were averaging close to 100 hours a week and 5 hours of sleep a night. Nobody outside the building believed the number until it leaked. You believed it before you finished reading the headline because you'd already lived 3 weeks of it. The math, when you actually run it, is stranger than the headline. Base salary for a first-year analyst at a top bank runs somewhere around $100,000 to $125,000, with a bonus that adds another half to a full year's base on top, landing total comp somewhere between $165,000 and $225,000. It sounds enormous to anyone from your college who took a marketing job. Divided against 90-plus hours a week for 50-some weeks a year, it works out to something closer to what a mid-level manager makes per hour at a normal company. Except the normal company doesn't require you to be reachable at 2 a.m. because a managing director wants a football field's worth of comps reformatted before a 9 a.m. meeting. You don't say any of this out loud to your parents, who are quietly thrilled and slightly confused by the number on your first year-end statement. You don't say it to your college roommate either, who thinks you're rich now, in the uncomplicated way people think about 6 figures before they understand what an effective hourly rate looks like inside a bulge bracket bank. What you understand 3 months in that nobody explained during recruiting is that this level isn't where the money is. This level is the entrance fee. 3 years in, you make associate, either by grinding through the analyst class without burning out or by leaving for an MBA and coming back with a different title and the same expectations. The base jumps to somewhere between $175,000 and $250,000 depending on your year, and the bonus structure finally starts to feel like it's rewarding tenure instead of just survival. First-year associate bonuses typically land in the $100,000 to $150,000 range. And by your third year in the seat, that bonus alone can clear $200,000, pushing total comp toward $400,000 to $500,000. You move out of the apartment you shared with 2 other analysts. You start a brokerage account you actually fund instead of just opening. Your parents stop being confused and start being proud in a way that occasionally turns into asking for advice you're not remotely qualified to give yet, because they've quietly recalibrated what financially fine looks like based on your year-end number, not your actual net worth, which is still mostly cash and a maxed-out 401k. The hours ease marginally. You go from routinely all-nighters to routinely leaving around 11, which feels like freedom in the specific warped way that anything feels like relief after enough exposure to the alternative. You notice something new at this level that you didn't have the perspective to notice as an analyst. The VPs and directors above you aren't actually rich yet either. Not in the way outsiders assume bankers are rich. They have good comp and bad hours and mortgages on apartments that cost more than most people's houses. The real wealth, you start to suspect, is further up than anyone at your level can currently see clearly, which turns out to be exactly correct, and exactly the thing nobody tells you during recruiting season. Vice President arrives somewhere between 4 and 6 years after your associate promotion, and it's the first title on this ladder that changes how strangers treat you before they know anything else about you. Base moves to $250,000, $300,000, and total compensation lands somewhere between $525,000 and $800,000 at a large bank. The kind of number that, said out loud at a dinner party, changes the temperature of the room the way money always does once people can actually picture it. What nobody mentions in the number itself is the deferral. 20 to 30% of your bonus at this level doesn't land in your account this year. It's paid out in restricted stock or deferred cash over the next several years, structured explicitly, so you can't just take the number and walk. You do the math and realize your real, liquid, spendable comp this year is meaningfully lower than the headline figure everyone assumes when they hear VP at a bank. You don't correct anyone's assumption. Correcting it would require explaining a compensation structure to people who just want to be impressed by a round number. And you've learned it costs you nothing to let them be impressed. You buy a place, finally, the first real asset that isn't a brokerage statement, a one-bedroom, financed conservatively despite what your income would technically qualify you for. Because you've seen enough colleagues stretch into apartments that turned a comp year with a smaller bonus into genuine financial stress. You start, quietly, to build the first version of a real balance sheet. Retirement accounts. The deferred stock vesting on a schedule you track in a spreadsheet. A taxable account you actually rebalance instead of ignore. It isn't dynasty trust money. It isn't even silent millionaire portfolio money. But for the first time since the 100-hour week started, the number in the account is doing something other than just proving you survived another year. Director comes 6 to 8 years after VP. And it's the level where the bank quietly starts asking a different question of you than it did before. Up through VP, the job was mostly execution, modeling, negotiating deal terms, managing the analysts underneath you. At director, total comp moves to somewhere between $700,000 and $900,000. The majority of it in bonus, and the bonus increasingly gets tied not just to how well you executed deals, but to whether you're starting to originate them, bringing in relationships, bringing in mandates, proving you can be trusted with the bank's client list instead of just its spreadsheets. This is also, for most people on this track, roughly the point where the number on the year-end statement crosses your first million in liquid net worth, counting the vested stock, the retirement accounts, and the actual cash sitting in a brokerage account instead of committed to a mortgage or tied up in deferred comp you can't touch yet. You don't announce this to anyone. You don't buy anything that signals it. If anything, you've started dressing slightly more plainly than the associates 2 levels below you. Because you've noticed the way people notice things slowly, over years, without ever being told directly, that senior people who are actually secure tend to perform wealth less, not more, and the ones still performing it hardest are usually still a level or two away from the number that would let them stop. The pressure at this level is different from the analyst year pressure. It's not about surviving hours anymore. It's about whether you can bring in enough business to justify becoming a managing director, and whether the bank believes you can before your window to prove it closes. Some directors spend 6 to 8 years here and never get the next title. Nobody tells you at 22 that this is where the actual filter happens. Not the 100-hour weeks, which almost everyone survives, but this quieter, longer test of whether you can be trusted with the thing the entire bank actually runs on: relationships, not spreadsheets. Managing director arrives, if it arrives at all, somewhere between 12 and 15 years after that first paycheck cleared at 11:40 p.m. Most analysts who started alongside you never get here. The promotion cycle at every level below has quietly filtered people out, not through failure exactly, just through the accumulation of years where someone else generated more revenue than you did. The ones who make it reach total compensation commonly running $1 million to $5 million or more with a base around $400,000, and the rest in a bonus explicitly tied to how much business you originate, not how well you execute someone else's mandate. 30 to 50% of that bonus gets deferred. Same mechanism as the VP years, just with far larger numbers attached and a much longer vesting horizon. Money that's yours on paper the moment it's announced, and yours in practice over the following several years, contingent on staying, and on the bank staying solvent enough to pay it out. You've stopped being surprised by this structure. You understand now that it was never designed to make you rich quickly. It was designed to make you expensive to leave. If you've made it this far into how this ladder actually works, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. A subscribe helps me keep making these. No pressure, but I genuinely appreciate it. What almost nobody outside the industry understands about this level is that the visible signs of MD wealth are mostly gone by design. You don't drive anything that draws attention in the parking garage. Your suit is well made and completely unremarkable. The number crossing 7 figures most years lives almost entirely in accounts nobody sees. Vesting stock, deferred cash, retirement contributions maxed without discussion. Because the entire culture above VP quietly punishes visible spending as a signal of insecurity, not success. You are, by any reasonable measure, wealthy now. You have also never looked less like it. You have 4 analysts on your team now, and one of them, 6 months in, starts showing the exact signs you remember from your own first year without recognizing them as signs at the time. The flat effect in status meetings, the emails time-stamped 3 a.m., the way she stopped correcting people who mispronounced her name because she'd stopped having the energy for things that didn't directly affect the deal. You pull her into a room on a Thursday, ostensibly about a modeling error, and she starts crying about 40 seconds in, apologizing the entire time, the way junior people do when they've been taught that needing anything is itself the failure. You know the numbers on this because everyone at your level eventually looks them up, usually after watching it happen to someone on their own team. Roughly a third to half of analysts at most banks burn out before making it to associate. Nationally, closer to half of junior bankers leave the industry within 3 years of starting, and recent surveys put the number, considering an exit, at over 70%. You were the one who didn't leave. You've never been fully sure whether that makes you resilient or just the version of yourself that happened to be built for a system you now, 15 years later, help run. You have a choice in that room that your own MD never gave you. Push her the way you were pushed, because the deal doesn't care about her sleep schedule, or quietly restructure her workload for the next month without telling anyone above you, absorbing the difference yourself the way nobody absorbed it for you. You choose the second one, once, for her specifically, without changing a single policy the bank actually runs on. It doesn't fix anything at scale. You know that. You do it anyway, and you don't examine too closely why doing it for one 24-year-old feels like the only genuinely uncomplicated good decision you've made since you were her age yourself. 20 years after that first paycheck, you make partner, technically participating managing director. The internal title reportedly used at firms structured this way since the 1999 IPO ended true equity partnership. It is, by a wide margin, the rarest title on this entire ladder. The bank elevates roughly 1% of its total workforce to managing director in a given cycle. Of the many hundreds of MDs promoted that same year, the partner class that follows, appointed only every other year, typically numbers somewhere in the range of 60 to 95 people firm-wide globally. You do the math once, privately, and don't repeat the ratio to anyone. More MDs get promoted in a single year than partners get named across an entire 2-year cycle. The compensation shifts one more time at this level. A base salary reportedly around $900,000, plus a share of a separate bonus pool paid predominantly in stock rather than cash, tying your remaining career even more tightly to the firm's long-term performance instead of any single year's deal flow. You are, by now, unambiguously one of the wealthiest people most of your extended family has ever personally known. And you have still never once described yourself that way out loud to anyone, including your spouse, who found out the actual number from a public compensation filing rather than from you. You think sometimes about the analyst who cried in the conference room 3 years ago. She left the bank 18 months after that conversation for a corporate finance role with better hours and a fraction of the comp. You don't know if you made the right call keeping the system mostly intact while quietly protecting her for 1 month. You know the system produced you, eventually, at the very top of a pyramid that burns out a third to half of everyone who enters it before they ever see a number like this one. Your first paycheck cleared at 11:40 p.m. on a Tuesday, 20 years and roughly a dozen promotions ago. You still remember the exact number, the way people remember the first thing that ever felt like proof they'd be fine. You don't remember most of the numbers between then and now with the same clarity. They blur together somewhere around the VP years. A series of increasingly large figures attached to increasingly deferred stock you had to track in spreadsheets instead of feel in your bank account. What you remember instead is texture. The 100-hour weeks that turned out to be real for some people and exaggerated for others, depending entirely on which desk and which year. The moment at VP when you first understood that the headline comp number and your actual liquid cash were two different conversations. The director years, when the job quietly stopped being about modeling and became about whether people trusted you with relationships instead of spreadsheets. The analyst crying in the conference room, and the 1 month you protected her without changing anything the system actually runs on. You are, today, meaningfully wealthy by almost any definition a stranger would use. And you have spent 2 decades getting progressively better at not looking like it. The suit less flashy at MD than it was at associate, the car more forgettable at partner than it was at VP. Because somewhere around director you learned what the people 2 levels above you already knew. The wealth that lasts here is the wealth nobody has to see to believe exists. If you want to see what a fortune like this eventually turns into once it stops needing a bank's deferred stock schedule to grow, once someone actually decides to build a structure of their own instead of climbing someone else's, watch our episode on every level of a family office. It picks up almost exactly where this one leaves off.